analysis of national current affairs.
Not money.
Freshly pressed on Smooth 98.1.
Okay.
No.
Studio is live. Mics are up. Studio silence, please. Good morning and welcome to Smooth 98.1. If you're just tuning in, this is Smooth Breakfast with Valentine Ohu and Ayo Mairo Ese. It is time for us to go into detailed analysis of our newspaper stories this morning inside of Freshly Pressed 981. And with us is Folu Storms at Folu Storms on Twitter. Good morning.
Good morning, Lagos. Good morning, Valentine.
Good morning. And Ikemesit is back from his sojourn.
Morning, Lagos. Morning, Valentine. Glad to be back.
Good to have you back. And Cheta Nwaeze is here for the second day in the week. I'm so glad. Cheta, good morning. Welcome. How are you doing, sir?
Alive.
All right, cool.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good enough.
So nice. We like that.
Please join the conversation by sending us messages on Twitter at Smooth981FM. Use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. Send messages to WhatsApp. Our WhatsApp number is 0809-444-0981. And we're streaming live on YouTube, and you can send messages there too. All right, so watch us live, subscribe to that channel. Just type in the search box Smooth981FM Lagos, and you'd find us. All right, we have 9 stories to go through. The first is from the Punch newspaper.
Thank you, Val. So, Chas, I'll come to you for the first story. Renewed attacks uncover block sources of Boko Haram, ISWAP funds. DHQ tells EU others. Now, this story points to the renewed attacks in the northeast, particularly questioning where funds are coming for these attacks. Can you please take us through this story?
Basically, the EU released the reports the day during the weekend, where they clearly stated that the war against Boko Haram is going badly. And this is kind of like a reaction from the defense headquarters.
Yeah.
But what the defense headquarters is trying to do is taking the rather lazy approach of essentially blaming the EU and the rest for help funding Boko Haram through the back door by saying, oh, uncover the sources of funding. I find it's ridiculous. I can't find a better word for in the sense that we've had this insurgency now for almost 10 years, and because this insurgency proper started in 2011, although the first Boko Haram blowout, the major blowout, was in 2009, in which the founder of Boko Haram was extrajudicially killed. A lot of people have pointed out, and myself included, have pointed out that every time we hear of prosecution of a Boko Haram the kingpin, then they will show the picture, they will show video of the person, of the so-called kingpin, and you'll see essentially one small church rat that does not know the difference between a check of 1,000 naira and a check of 10,000 naira, and then you say, is this the kingpin? As long as we're not being honest with ourselves about the source of this financing, which happens to be prominent people within the region, then nothing is going to change. Secondly, the Nile is a river in Egypt. The truth is that the problem is getting worse, and a lot of it is because of plain incompetence, and we can't ignore the fact that it has now become a war economy. There are people who are profiting from this war.
Yeah.
We can't deny that. So yesterday, we sat here and talked about how Boko Haram was attacking power lines around Maiduguri.
Yeah.
Guess what? As of 1800 hours last night, yesterday evening, they had cut off Maiduguri from the national grid. so you can't, because one thing that the defense headquarters spokesperson, Brigadier General Nwachukwu, said in his interview was that, oh, this is the last kicks of a dying horse, blah, blah, blah. This horse doesn't look to me like it's dying. This horse looks to me that it's alive and kicking. Monguno has been occupied.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the UN confirmed a major attack on or around an IDP camp that has 55,000 people.
Yeah.
And then you are sitting there and telling me, trying to shift the blame and telling me, come on.
All right. So, thank you for that last point. Is it not a bit worrying that where we have international organizations like the EU talk about the fact that the state of security in Nigeria is worrying, and yet consistently service chiefs have denied this, saying that we've got it under control. Largely, we still have it. Is it
They
not?
clearly don't have it under control.
No,
Let's not
obviously, but the
even.
fact that they are presenting, would there be a justification for that, or should we be concerned that we're not hearing the truth from our own people?
Can I just point that at this point, I think one always has to take Western media with a pinch of salt. These are people who, you could have all sorts of people come through Lagos, and yes, Lagos is not necessarily the safest place, but also it's not a war zone. And I've witnessed what Western media can
This is not
translate
Western media.
places.
This is the EU itself.
It doesn't matter. It's Western. It's not of us. It's not for us. It's not by us.
Have you been to
So I'm
Ghana?
just pointing out that although there are realities that we cannot deny that Cheta has talked about very clearly, I think that if there's one thing that dare I say I actually approve of the Nigerian government doing, which is not necessarily cowtailing to what Western security forces have to say, and I think that's something that should be a sticking point.
Okay, now that we've established that one, let's go to Borno together and then try and drive 10 minutes outside Maiduguri.
I don't think she's denying
I
that.
didn't
Okay.
deny that. You're
What
not
she's
listening
just
to what I
saying is
said. I
that-
acknowledged everything you said, which is very true. I'm also just aware that we do have to be careful with our sources.
Yes, we have to be careful with our
Alright, let's
sources,
move
and
on
we have
to
to
our
acknowledge the fact
next.
that our people lie a lot.
Oh,
Our
Cheta,
own people.
thank you. Let's move on to our next story. Thank you very much. Folu, I'll come to
Real.
you for this. Since you have
Yes.
the mic, Amechi summoned emergency meeting of stakeholders over delay of real project. This is from this day newspaper. So yesterday, there are a number of headlines and reactions as expected from Nigerians saying that the expected deadline for the railway project would be April. Now, reading through this story, I'm a bit concerned as to the statements made by the minister, stating that as if he didn't have control as of the time, and he pushed the blame to the contractors. Please take us to the story.
All right. So the story is from this day newspaper, and we have a minister, minister of transportation, Mr. Chukwuka Amici today is his name, not to me. And he is talking about the possible non-completion of the ongoing Lagos-Ibadan rail project.
Yeah.
I do not think that surprise is a word that I will use when it comes to the rail project, because for years we've been talking about it. There have always been reasons for delay. Remember that in 2018 it was meant to be, completed, then pushed, then pushed, then pushed. What is concerning is that government officials in general tend to have this us versus them language, and we can see that very evident here. For example, speaking on the April-May deadline, he said, and I quote, "I can't answer that question. When you ask them, they still tell you it's true." He talks about the CCECC being political with the project. However, when we look at the nitty-gritty of the issues they're addressing, one of the problems they say is their vessels are at the seaport and they can't berth because of the long queue. Now, this is a reality that a lot of ships deal with in Nigeria. If you go to any of our beaches and you look across the coastline, you will literally see the queue of ships. They're paying demurrage for each day. They do say that they are going to have a complete stakeholders meeting with the Nigerian Port Authority as well to try and resolve that. But we're also hoping for a more permanent resolution. They talk about the tracks, that the tracks are 100% down. He speaks specifically about the Ibuta Meta aspect, knowing that there is a first contract from Ibuta Meta to Ibadan, and then there's another from Ibuta Meta to Apapa Seaport. Again, talking about all the challenges of Lagos. There's nothing new that he's really saying, to be honest. What we are continuing to see, which we're not very happy with, and I'm sure not a lot of people will be happy with, is this continued removing himself from sort of the blame. And it is your office at the end of the day that's meant to be overseeing this and meant to be handling it. So yes, there are challenges, but these are not new challenges. Perhaps you should have been more forthright with the challenges at the beginning. And even now, I think a big issue that our government still has is really taking people along properly, because he says that a number of minor stations will be completed, not the major ones. Tell us, which are the minor ones? What counts as minor? Why is that easier? Yes, Lagos has challenges. Yes, you have to get rid of pipes. Yes, there are difficulties, but I think in terms of transparency and just accountability, the minister's office needs to step up a bit more.
Thank you very much. So accountability, responsibility,
And transparency.
and transparency, and then who holds them to account. So obviously they have a boss. They report to the president in terms of progress, and I'll use the word KPI. So the work you've been given. Unfortunately for us Nigerians, when we read, if it was a corporate organization, for instance, and the managing director or the chief operating officer comes out to say that, well, this project would have been done, but the contractors I gave it to didn't do so and so, he would come under fire. He would receive a query for that.
And this is why I always say this, and I go back to it again. We need an active and a responsible citizenry. Until we as a people stop doing the same thing that our minister is doing, which is pointing fingers. Well, we have a voice. And when we do decide to use it, which is rare, as a unit, it does have an impact. So if we want better governance, we simply must insist on it, and we must be active towards it and take steps towards it. Otherwise, we just continue the same path we've always been, which is saying, they didn't give us this, so hey, problem.
Imagine.
Thank you.
And it's the same issue that the Federal Airport Authority were complaining about, saying that the Cat 3 systems, instrument landing systems, are still held up at the ports. So the nation should shut down just because of that. Questions now. Justin EJ sent in a message on WhatsApp. He said, I'm with Folu on news to control a narrative. The United States has never won any war since Vietnam, but you'll never hear them yield the narrative to the opposition. The narrative is of the theater of war, and the Nigerian army should stay on top of it. Spin it if necessary, provided it is doing the needful on the ground.
Seat partner, the Persian Gulf War 1991 comes to mind. But the larger point is the value.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. All right, Ikemesit, good to hear your voice. Let's talk about this story. Vanguard newspaper reports Malabu on the Malabu oil scam is back in the news. The federal government is filing or has filed a fresh 42-count charge against the former Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Mr. Mohammed Bello Adoke, and 6 others were alleged to have committed a fraud to the tune of $1.1 billion. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so the story on the Vanguard, which is really a reproduction from the news agency of Nigeria Report, is basically a drop-down icon of all of the various charges. We've talked extensively on Freshly Pressed about the viability or otherwise of foisting a significant amount of counts, right, in a criminal charge against a person who's suspected of corruption, and whether that's productive or not. But that's really by the wayside. The crux of this case, for those of us who might need to refresh our memories, is that the federal government is alleging that Mohammed Bello Adoke, in his capacity as the Attorney General of the Federation, negotiated a controversial oil deal on behalf of a shell company which he had personal interest in, and which he had hired a few people to stand as his fronts, to the tune of, the main charge is $1.1 billion, but there are a couple of other charges in receiving, for example, him and his cause, for example, forging a letter of resignation to open a bank account in order to receive, for example, the sum of $101.5 million, amongst others. It's a really, really extensive breakdown. I would advise, if you want to get caught up on this, just go do some research on the story. But the most important takeaway from me from this standpoint is, at the time, there wasn't a lot of hoopla about the fact that it was the Attorney General of the Federation that was doing this. I mean, first it happened behind closed doors, so it only really came to light after the fact. But when you track back a couple of years afterwards and you see, for example, what the current Attorney General is doing, it does raise questions as to the commitment of various Nigerian administrations to the doctrine of separation of powers. It's been mind-boggling that we've had a situation where the Attorney General of the Federation is acting as a significant economic actor, and we now have a situation where the current Attorney General, not implying that it's corrupt, so that you don't think that I'm comparing apples and eggs, but you have a situation, for example, where he's taking a more activist position with respect to taxation, right? So these are different things right now, but there's something to be said about, whether that particular office or certain executive offices or cabinet level offices empower their holders to act in ways which the Constitution might not have necessarily contemplated them to act in. Because I don't know about, I can speak for myself, I don't know about you, Folu, but I can't remember a constitutional law, any law which empowers the Attorney General to act as an acting party.
To act or to speak as if he were in that position.
Indeed, and that's where the corrupt element comes into it. And so you have organizations, for example, like the SBMs of the world, that would probably advise clients looking to do business in Nigeria as to who the appropriate party to be on the opposite end of a particular transaction you're interested in should be, I think it would be very cool for anyone to make the case that the Attorney General should be negotiating an oil deal. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chika Gina from Marina says, federal government, Boko Haram has been technically defeated. Army chief, Boko Haram has been overrun. Defense chief, we've bought more sophisticated weapons to defeat Boko Haram. Buratai, the recent attack by Boko Haram is the last stretch. Federal government to EU blocked the funding from Boko Haram. Who do we believe in all of this? It's funny, but it's true. And the sense, like we mentioned, and we've talked about a number of times, that we keep hearing different communication, different versions of different aspects of the government. Now, Ayo says, or Yemi says, Amechi's case is just an indication of absence of performance management in the government. Ayo, don't even mention KPI. But let's move on to our next story, and that is that the president, Muhammadu Buhari, meets UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, seeks extradition of fugitives to answer corruption charges. Now, this happened when on the sidelines of the UK Africa Investment Summit 2020, where the president is seeking for the cooperation of the National Crime Agency of the UK. Please take us through the story, Cheta.
You don't like Boris? It's not your guy?
No, Boris is Boris. I don't know what's my business with Boris. He's my president I'm concerned about, and unfortunately, he's a one-trick pony. The only thing that he lights up when he's talking about is the perceived corruption of his enemies. If I were the UK, I would send Diazani back, and I can assure you that the EFCC will not convict her. They will not be able to, because these guys have proven so incompetent that they will just, what they just do is they carry. I mean, look at the story that was it Folu did just not Ikemesit story. Just carry 42 counts and throw at somebody, bam, and you will not. Good example, James Ibori, and I said it on this show before it happened, that he would not be convicted in Nigeria. Not because of the fact that he was able to arrange to get the court to Asaba, but because of the fact that they threw 197 counts at him. When eventually he somehow did Zuzu and found his way to the UK. How many counts did the UK throw at him? 8. Those are people who do their diligence. Regarding my personal peeve, there are more salient issues to talk about right now. You are in, every time Buhari goes, especially to the UK, he goes there, corruption. But there's quite a lot of malfeasance happening. Let us start with within his own personal circle. His son was riding 150 million naira bike. How did he get it? His wife has shouted about cabals and corruption and all of that. Has anything happened? There have been petitions to the EFCC about corruption. They've been ignored because the chairman, or is it president, the chairman of the APC said, join the APC and your sins are forgiven. We all heard that. What has the president? The president has supported a state governor who was videoed taking bribes. What? So when you do all of those things, people look at you and they don't take you serious. And that in itself is a problem, a perception problem. When people have the wrong perception of you, then you will not go forward. We should be talking, even though his actions are opposites of what he's doing. His talk in yesterday's story about trade is actually the right talk. That is what we should be focusing on, growing our economy.
Right, thank you very much, Cheta, for your take on this.
All right, we take a few messages now. Wingus says, God bless you, Folu, for that intelligent view on the Boko Haram insurgency. There's a lot of sensationalism from the foreign media for whatever reason to instill fear in us. Joining the foreign media to sensationalize the insurgency absolutely does not make sense to me. And this other one?
And says, good morning, all. Well done, guys. You're all well. You're doing a great job. I always look forward to listening. Well, this morning, it seems Cheta is not happy. Okay.
And Felix Anyanwu from Lagos
says, with the sophistication and strength of the American army, they have not been able to eliminate the Taliban. We should encourage and not talk down on our military. They're doing well when it comes to Boko Haram. Let us encourage the government to do more.
All right, let's move on to the next story.
The
from-
Nile is a river in Egypt.
Let's move on to the next story from Premium Times. The Nigerian Immigration Service gives entry requirements for non-Nigerians. Here, Folu, they outline some categories of persons and different requirements.
Indeed, I think this is really just serves as a public service announcement for people who, because we hear about visa on arrival, and I think for some people they assume that it means that if you're a tourist, you can simply just show up to the gates at the immigration will welcome you.
Yeah.
They are not going to welcome you; they're going to send you back. The Comptroller General restated these requirements, saying that ECOWAS citizens, countries with visa abolition agreement with Nigeria require no visa entry for Nigeria, but you do have to enter with valid travel documents. It's not enough to say, oh, but I'm from Ghana. Charlie, how do we know? Let's see your, papers, and also to go through an approved entry point. I find that particularly amusing that they've mentioned that, because we all know that our land borders are porous.
Yeah.
And it just points to that fact again that people do tend to stroll into the country that perhaps should have been checked somewhere. But I think what's important, the interesting things to note: one, holders of African Union passports can arrive on short visits and obtain a visa upon arrival at any of the 5 international airports. And big shout out to those of you who already have that African Union passports. Some of us is our focus in life. Diplomatic passport holders, of course, are not really an issue. There's a visa waiver agreement. But for visas such as residence, temporary work permit, and dependents, you are supposed to obtain your visa at embassies or consular missions. And for those who are not holders of a passport of any member country, ECOWAS or African Union, but they're applying for business purpose, you can apply for a visa on arrival online, and you absolutely must obtain that approval online before starting your journey to Nigeria. I also thought it was interesting that they mentioned that you also have to pay online. Cash payment is not allowed. I don't know how new or long-standing that has been, but I definitely approve. I am enjoying, I think, the removal of cash from a lot of our day-to-day activities in Nigeria, although for those vendors that are still trying to charge people 15
Yeah, I know.
POS, please respect
Still an
yourselves
issue.
and respect us. Stop that.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Cheta
much.
and I have a horror story about it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Pencom now. Just the other day, I think was it yesterday or 2 days ago, that they were complaining. Somebody actually said that they know pensioners who are still collecting 8,000 naira every month. This was yesterday. Thank you. So the Punch reports from this on this story: Pencom orders PFAs to raise retirees' pensions. Your thoughts, please, Ikemesit.
First off, I should say that the headline is a bit misleading. But PENCOM actually is the pension enhancement. So there's this thing called the program withdrawal. So just to break it down, when you are eligible to draw down from your pension account, you are initially paid a lump sum, right? Which is, I think the statutory provision is 35% of what you already have. And then after that, you're paid progressive amounts. Those are called program withdrawals. It's more like you withdrawing from the bank account.
Right.
Yes, is where only that in this case is the PFA that takes the initiative in paying that to you. So now what PENCOM has said now is that because of the increase in the value of investments that a lot of the PFAs have made based on the assets of the accounts of retirees, they should increase right that accrue to retirees. Retirees have been complaining that their program withdrawals have been frozen for, hence the complaints that you made about. But now PENCOM, seemingly having heard the stereotypical cry of Nigerians, has decided that PFAs, if there are accounts that you have within your administration which have seen a substantial increase in investment, you should increase the quantum of the withdrawals. Should mention also that there are a couple of things within the pension space that that would aid the expansion of the program. It's one thing that we have recognized is that over the last 4 years, this has been one part of the economy that has done very well. It's been stellar, it's been booming. But then the number of people that actually have retirement savings accounts is still restricted, and so there's a lot that government can do in terms of providing assurance to PFAs to encourage them to actually go out and encourage people to open accounts, and also the need for people to actually make sure that they are properly supervising and policing their pension fund administrators. So if there are things on the administrative side in terms of updating your data that you need to do, or just checking in on the on the success or otherwise all of your pension investments, you should make sure that you're policing your PFA.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ikemesit. I'll come to you, Cheta, for this next one. Headline reads: Lassa fever kills 14, infects 82 in seven states. Panic in Ondo. The states affected include Ondo, Edo, Ebonyi, Taraba, Plateau, Bauchi, and Ogun State. Please take it to the slide.
First things first, God rest the dead. Now, reading this story, I feel a lot of anger. Lassa fever is caused by exposure to rodents, and it's native to Nigeria, actually. Lassa fever was first described from a case in Lassa, Borno State in 1969. That was 51 years ago. And since then, we've not been able to get a handle of it, a handle on it. Across West Africa, Lassa kills about 5,000 people a year. Now, let us look at what causes Lassa fever. Rats. Okay. Where do rats thrive? In dirty environments. Now, let us look around us. Let us step outside this compound and then walk along the main road from here to, say, Silverbed. What do you see? Dirty environments, open gutters. It's shameful that 2,000 years ago, the Romans solved the problem of mosquitoes because they identified correctly that mosquitoes bred in the swamps around Rome, and they cleared those marshes. And the incidence of malaria in Rome, ancient Rome, went down by a factor of 90%. We still cannot clear our gutters. We still build open drainages, open sewers, as it were, in 2020 Nigeria. And then people just throw rubbish all over the place. It builds up, and we provide, essentially, we are breeding these rats and mosquitoes and all of that. The Lassa fever epidemic is a commentary on the failure of our society to get even the simplest things right. And it's not sad, it's infuriating.
Sorry.
Thank you, Cheta, and I can understand your sentiment on this particular one. JP says, good morning, freshly pressed. Not sure the immigration service can make this based on arrival seamless. I have my doubts when it takes 35 days to renew the Niger passport.
All right. Our next story, somehow related, but it's more about traffic, or rather, the licenses that are issued to the Nigerians in diaspora. But take us through the story from the Punch newspaper as FRC plans driving license for Nigerians moving to the US and Europe. Folu?
I just to say, dude, why did it take you 35 days? Is something you're not telling us? Let us know. But let's move on. So, what I think again is interesting, as usual. Sometimes the headlines can be a little bit misleading. Punch newspaper. What this is really about is the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission trying to have a reciprocal arrangement with some European countries, as well as the United States, to allow Nigerians who perhaps are on holiday, or Nigerians in the diaspora, to also drive here in Nigeria while they're on holiday, but then it would work both ways. It would be vice versa. I would be very interested to see how this takes off. I mean, big shout out to Abike, Daniel and everyone trying to push this forward. The issues, again, tend to be issues of accountability, issues of who's got a genuine passport, a genuine driver's license, or a genuine FRC license. And it could be genuine, but did they actually go through any sort of driving school where they checked? And these are unfortunately the lapses that I think other countries are going to be concerned about, because if our agencies are unable to monitor and regulate effectively, then the reality is that they are going to end up with people on their streets who perhaps they would not be happy driving. Now, again, though, the other thing to note is, at least with the United States, where I have driven with my Nigerian driver's license, actually, if you registered in some states, you can drive, and they do check it. So I was a bit nervous. I remember, renting the car and thinking, oh, are they going to just be like, see, step to the left, you can't be here, it's not for you. And that went through, but the reality is that their law enforcement is very strict, and there will be police out on the street. So if you're a Nigerian and you're hearing this news and you're excited, just be careful, because they will come for you. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Valid points there. But let's touch on this story very quickly. As a group, there's a particular group that is demanding the resignation of the CGN for his pro-Sharia stance, amongst others, petitioning the UN and some other bodies. Ikemesit, please, your thoughts.
Yeah. So this group, the Ecumenical Youth Association, is petitioning Chief Justice Ibrahim Tanko, saying that his call for an expansion of Sharia jurisprudence beyond personal matters in the Constitution is dangerous, and it justifies the struggle for the establishment of an Islamic state by the likes of Islamist groups like Boko Haram. A bit of a stretch, if you ask me, but the call by the CJN, which actually happened a while ago, is one that has sparked significant debate within the legal community. Right now, Islamic law is applicable in personal matters such as marriage, such as the devolution of properties, and a few other things. And it appears that the CJN seems to suggest that current written Nigerian legislation might perhaps be insufficient insofar as it applies to Nigerian Muslims. It will be very hard to justify that to any court of lawyers, but I don't think it's something that rises up to the level of a human rights violation that will require its petition.
Interesting.
Plus, it's not imminent. It requires any such change will require a constitutional amendment, and if past constitutional amendment efforts are any guide, it will take a while.
We know how long it will take.
Yeah.
Folu, JP replies your question about the 35 days thing. He says because Roger wasn't paid.
so sorry. Do the needful.
And then
Are
we
you
have this
encouraging
from
bribery and corruption?
Topesha says PENCOM is the actual problem of that sector. They are the reason the PFAs can't do many things that the customers are complaining about. So much red tape and insensitive regulation that have negative impact on the retirees.
We thank everybody who sent in messages on YouTube, WhatsApp, Twitter. We appreciate you. We're going to look at more of messages during Lagos Talks 981 conversation. Next is the Grapevine 981, but special thanks to Cheta for coming in this morning at Checkstyle on Twitter, at Folu Storms on Twitter, and at Judge Ike. That's Ikemesit Effiong. Stay with us.
The headlines.
I almost forgot your Twitter handle, Judge Ike.
Interesting point on the driver's license. I thought that too. I was like, okay, great idea, but how many Nigerians?
We don't do tests.
How many Nigerians actually did a driver's test?
It's really when I read through it, it looks like it's really for people in the
most
diaspora.
expensive I drove in the US.
Yeah.
The last
Yeah. But you have an idea.